Good afternoon. Okay. Well, I have a few seconds. N- Oh my goodness. Well, how's everybody doing? Five, four, three. I'd like first to begin by welcoming you all, and this is a great moment in time. And so I want to give honor to the pastor of this church who has graciously partnered with this event. The Reverend Ronald Rawls is pastor of this amazing Greater Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church in the same city where he was born and raised. He graduated from the University of Florida with a Bachelor of Arts degree in religion. Reverend Rawls was ordained as an itinerant deacon in 1997 and an itinerant elder in 1999. He received his first pastoral appointment in 1999 as well, and since that time he has served congregations in Chiefland, Trenton, Jasper, St. Augustine, and of course, Gainesville, Florida. As an itinerant elder, Reverend Rawls is fully aware that social justice is in the DNA of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And he continues to exemplify the importance of the church being positioned in the forefront of the pursuit of justice. He's widely known for his intense and aggressive activism in St. Augustine, St. Johns County, and the state of Florida. He was among a small group of civil rights leaders who challenged the city of St. Augustine and won. He follows in the footsteps of his presiding elder, F.D. Richardson, Dr. Robert B. Haling, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in their pursuit of justice. Being mentored by Dr. Robert Haling, the father of the civil rights movement in St. Augustine, is an experience that the Reverend Rawls values and relies on and in expanding his work in ministry. He approaches ministry from a three-legged perspective, believing that our ancestors are pushing us forward by confronting, educating, and building. He envisions us being the head and not the tail, above and not beneath, and having the discipline to leave an inheritance for our children's children and a legacy for our descendants. Reverend Rawls is married to the Honorable Michonne T. Rawls, the county court judge in Alachua County. They have three beautiful children, five grandchildren who completely occupy his heart. Grand Friday is his brand. So I want to welcome him to the podium for just a moment, the man of God who is called, appointed, and anointed. Let us receive Reverend Ronald Rawls.
All right. Want to welcome everyone here, and I definitely don't want to take up your time. And so I'm going to put it in the hands of whoever needs to have it in their hands so we can hear from Dr. Simmons and the rest of the panel. God bless you and welcome to Greater Bethel AME Church.
How's everyone? I'm going to introduce our panel, and then Dr. Gillis is going to introduce Zohara. I just want to read a little bit. So we'll start with Dr. Vincent Edward Alawale, Udajima. Adejumo, pardon me. He's currently a senior lecturer of African American Studies and an affiliate senior lecturer of political science at the University of Florida, as well as the founder of the ALU Institute of Learning Incorporated, OLU. He's from Tampa, Florida, and is a 2008 graduate from Florida State University. That's all right. Earning a Bachelor's of Science degree in Business Administration, triple majoring in Business Management, Management Information Systems, and Human Resource Management. In the summer of 2015, Dr. Adejumo graduated from the University of Florida Political Science PhD program majoring in Policy and Administration. He currently teaches Intro to African American Studies, The Wire, Mentoring At-Risk Youth, Black Wall Street, and Black Masculinity. And due to his continued involvement and reputation for teaching at the University of Florida, he's been selected as the Professor of the Year by the UF Black Student Union for 2005-2006 school years. He's also selected as the Professor and Advisor of the Year by the University of Florida College of Liberal Arts and Sciences for 2017-2018. Is that right? 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. So, welcome. And Dr. Kevin Bird serves as the Center's Experiential Learning Coordinator and Lecturer with the UF Bob Graham Center. And he has a doctorate in history from the University of Florida with a focus on American South. And he tracks community-based struggles from Reconstruction to the late 20th century to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty as set forth in the U.S. Constitution. African Americans led the pursuit for these ideals beginning in the 1860s in the deep southern context in which Dr. Bird grew up, in southwest Mississippi and southeast Louisiana. Dr. Bird has termed as the Macomb organizing model become the dominant methodology used by African Americans in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee organizers in what developed into the largest expansion of democracy in the history of the U.S. And so I think I read that a little funny, but I think you study this methodology that was developed in these groups, right? And I am Dr. Levy. I am spontaneously doing these intros, so I apologize for reading them directly and stumbling over them because I'm just now looking at them for the first time. But I'm an instructor of genetics at the University of Florida, but I'm also a graduate student in higher education and administration. And so I teach genetics, but I'm also learning all the time. And my current research interests include the history of eugenics and its influence on higher education, and then the desegregation of academic faculty in public universities in the South. And also I want to study the influences of past residential segregation policies on current access to things like broadband and online learning opportunities and opportunities in general. So we're the panel, we're going to interview Dr. Simmons, and I think Dr. Gillis is going to introduce Dr. Simmons.
Thank you. It is my great honor to introduce this amazing specimen. Dr. Gwendolyn Zohara Simmons wants it short, and I said no. Is a retired professor emerita in African American and Religious Studies and affiliated faculty in Women's Studies at the University of Florida. She obtained her BA from Antioch University in Human Service, her MA in Religious Studies, and her PhD in Islamic Studies from Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Dr. Simmons became active in the Civil Rights Movement during her freshman year at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia in 1962. In the summer of '64, just 2 years later, she became field secretary for SNCC. That's that Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She joined hundreds of other college-age volunteers who traveled to Mississippi to work the Mississippi Freedom Summer Project. She was assigned to Laurel, Mississippi, where she became one of 3 women project directors in the state, working there for a total of 18 months. After leaving Mississippi, Dr. Simmons worked in the New York office of SNCC, organizing high school and college friends for the group. Her stint in New York was cut short when Julian Bond was denied his duly elected seat in the Georgia State Legislature. So she helped organize Julian Bond re-election campaign in his legislative district. After Bond's re-election, sounds like she did a good job. After his re-election, Dr. Simmons and a group of those who had worked on his campaign formed the Atlanta Project of SNCC, which became the organization's first major Southern urban project. It was in the Atlanta Project that the foundation for the Black Power Thrust, SNCC, was laid when the group wrote a position paper on Black Power that would later be published in the New York Times and labeled as SNCC's Black Power Manifesto. Just a little more, but it's really important. Since her years with SNCC, Dr. Simmons has served as an organizer with the National Council of Negro Women, serving as their Midwest Field Director for their project, Women Power, and later with the American Friends Service Committee, where she held a number of programs and administrative jobs for over 20 years. She returned to college in the late 80s to resume the college education that she had left behind to work full-time in the movement. She completed her academic studies in 2002. Dr. Simmons' primary academic focus was on Islamic law and its impact on Muslim women. She conducted research for 2 years as a Fulbright and Emerita scholar in Jordan, Egypt, Palestine, and Syria for the years 1996 through 1998, on the Sharia's impact on women contemporarily and the women's movement in those countries to change the laws. She taught courses on Islam, women in Islam, modern Islamic thought, Islam in African American religion, religious traditions, and race, religion, and rebellion. Additionally, she taught courses on the civil rights movement, on Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, among other African American studies topics. And finally, Dr. Simmons is a prolific public speaker on college and university campuses, as well as in community forums. She is featured in several films on the civil rights movement and on women in Islam. Additionally, and finally, she has written numerous articles and essays on the civil rights movement and on women and Islam. I want to thank you for being patient. When a person has given a sacrifice their life, I don't think time should be an issue. So with that, I want to thank you, Dr. Zohara Simmons, as Miss Sister Faye calls you, our local shero. Let's welcome her to the podium, Dr. Simmons. Thank you.
So, Faye, did you want to say something, or? Well, I have a tendency to be too bossy, but I feel an opening in the direction right now, and I think it makes sense to do a little kind of round robin of asking questions amongst ourselves and time ourselves a bit, and then ask the audience to offer questions as well. Does everyone like that idea? Who wants to start? Dr. Bird.
Dr. Simmons, what do you think was most challenging or scariest to the people that opposed you in your work, the people that rallied to try to block? What was it they were afraid of?
Well, first of all, good evening, good afternoon, rather, and thank you all for coming out, and thank you for having this event. My dear sister, Faye Williams, and it's wonderful to see a number of my close friends in the audience, as well as colleagues I've worked with since I've lived here in Gainesville. Dr. Bird, you know, growing up in the Jim Crow era in Memphis, Tennessee, it was clear in looking back, not when I was growing up at all, that the white citizens in Memphis, and certainly when I got to Mississippi and, Alabama, et cetera, they were afraid that black people were going to take something from them. They didn't understand that for all of us to have freedom, justice, and equality, the three things we often talk about, that it was going to be good for everybody. And that we would have been able, and subsequently to some extent have been able, to work together to build the country that we really all wanted. But because of the hatred that had been taught to them about black people from the enslavement period forward, there was just an irrational sense that if black people got the vote, if black people were able to, ride on the front seat of a bus or sit in a restaurant, that it was going to take something from them. And it was very, very unfortunate, but that's what I think. It was fear, irrational racism, and thinking they had whatever we gained, they would lose. Thank you for that question.
I'm kind of starstruck because this is, a mentor of mine. So, kind of want to just listen, but at the same time, I have to fulfill my duty for why I'm here.
Can you
so-
all hear him?
Yeah, y'all can hear me?
Okay.
Okay, all right. One of the things I wanted to ask you, Doc, is, the centerpiece of the book, or a big proponent in the book, is about power. What is your conception of power, and how does that apply to the black community when you say black power? But first of all, what is just your conception of power in general, and then specifically, how does that apply to black people, and then within your work as far as what you have done and what you continue to do?
Right. Well, thank you for that question, and thank you for being here. I want everybody to know that my dearly beloved colleague drove all the way from Orlando. And so I thank you for coming. The whole, to use the term power, a lot of us, we fear that term. And certainly when we began using it in the 60s, there was a lot of fear. I mean, there was fear from black people that, it was going to really bring the wrath of the white system down upon us. And quite a few black people were afraid of the term. And, the head of the NAACP spoke out against us in the New York Times, and others, they were very, very afraid. And even our dearly beloved Dr. King, he tried to get us not to use that term. He said, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. But it's going to frighten people. Maybe you shouldn't say it. So it's been controversial, and I still think it's controversial. For me, and I think for those of us who were in SNCC, it was about self-empowerment, that we had been raised to feel that we had no power, that we were powerless. And, the internalized racism that we had imbibed because of what we had been taught, the hatred that had been directed at us had made many of us, feel inferior. So inferior in every way, racially, and certainly while we had thriving communities that we had built because we had to build them, because we lived under apartheid, and so we had to have our own systems. And there were many who were clear that we were not disempowered in reality. But I think the majority of us did. So it was about loving ourselves, affirming ourselves, and unifying ourselves to build societies and to really help this country become the country that it claimed to be in its founding documents. So it was not a hatred. It was, as some people claimed, that we were promoting hate and that we wanted to do to white people what they had done to us. Quite the contrary. It was about self-empowerment. It was about love of self and therefore love of others.
And you mentioned something. Hello? Okay, I'll just take this one. Okay, you mentioned something very key when you say love of self. As a married man myself, as a father, as a brother, as a friend, as a mentor, mentee, one of the things that encompasses all those things when I think about that, what you're talking about, is family. And again, that's very pronounced in the book as far as your family. So how much has that played a role as far as your understanding throughout the years, as far as power is concerned, and how much has your family in general played a part in developing your thinking as far as these things, and has it evolved from I don't know, from when you first started in 1960 up until now? So, but again, just how has family played a role in all of this?
Well, Dan Berger, the author of the book, who worked, by the way, guys, over 6 years interviewing me and my former husband, Michael Simmons, to write the book. And he starts out, with my childhood. And I was very fortunate to be raised by my grandmother, Rhoda Douglas, who in terms of love, she showed me so much love as she raised me and laid the foundation for who I would become. And, there was a lot of love in our family. The church that I belonged to, a Baptist church, there was so much love in that church for all of us. And the segregated school that I went to from the first grade to the 12th grade, the same school, so same teachers, I knew them, and they loved us, and we loved them. And so that has been foundational, no question. And then to join SNCC, we called ourselves, and it was sexist language, a band of brothers and a circle of trust. Certainly, now when people say it, we say it was a band of sisters and brothers, but we didn't say that then. We said brothers, even though, over half of the staff were women. So the whole notion of love and the love that we had for each other in the movement was palpable. And I'm still in touch with all of us who are still alive, and we still have an organization called the SNCC Legacy Project. And even though we have ideological differences, we could fight ideologically like mad during meetings that would go on for something like 24, 36 hours without stopping, if you can believe that. You take a nap in your chair and then you just keep talking. Somebody would hit you and say, "It's your time to speak." Oh, you'd wake up and speak. So it was and still continues to be love. And this is what I think the movements of today, and whenever I talk to young people, I say, you have to love the people. You have to love yourself, and you have to love the people. Or if you don't, you'll sell them out.
So I'm also starstruck. You're a really important mentor for me. Not to mention Sister Faye. Thank you so much for organizing that. You're like two of my most important mentors in the movement. But I was looking back through my emails, and I realized in 2016, I wrote you an email and asked you to help me understand better when SNCC decided to be organized without white people within its ranks, right? And to not take money from the white community anymore, because I was kind of told that there was a directive from the SNCC organizers to the white organizers to go fight your own oppressors. That's how it was taught to me, and that never set well, because I couldn't imagine not having a directive that said, continue to fight racism, period, right? And so I want to ask you a little bit. So since then, I've read again the Black Power paper from the Atlanta Project, and I have a kind of a funny question. So the Nitty Gritty was a publication you were putting out, right? And Nitty Gritty meant something. I would like you to explain that a little bit, but also, moreover, that there was some kind of usurpment where it kind of crystallized your understanding of Black Power when the white organizers kind of took this thing that you had invented and kind of took it from you in a way and repackaged it. I just wanted you to share a little bit about how that helped you get to understanding that there needs to be all Black spaces for organizing.
Well, first of all, Hazel is a dear comrade, and thank you so much for agreeing to join all of us today. You know, the history of Black Power, as has often been told in the history books, present it as a very hateful movement that grew up within SNCC that was anti our white comrades, and this is absolutely not the truth. So what happened was that a number of us in the Atlanta Project had worked in the rural areas. In the case of Mike, he had been in Arkansas, my former husband, and I, of course, had been in Mississippi, and there were numbers of members of the Atlanta Project who were either Mississippi born, like Bill Ware, who was the chairperson of our group. And so we began this process of writing this paper by sitting with a tape recorder going, talking about our experiences organizing Black people in integrated groupings, and how often the local Black people, because of the internalization of racism, the taking away of so much of their ability to determine their own lives, they would often assume that if the group is integrated, it is the whites who are in charge. And so, for instance, when I was a project director there in Laurel, Mississippi, you know, I might be in the office, there might be a couple of my white comrades there, and so if a person from the community came in, they would assume that the white person was in charge, and they would go to them for their question or whatever it was. and they would have to tell them, well, you need to talk to Gwen, because that was, my name then. And so all of us had had these kinds of experiences of, if black people were in a meeting and talking, if a white person came in, the whole tone of the meeting would change. And so we were saying that this is a problem that can be solved by our white comrades going into the white community to organize against racism, against class oppression, and for us then to bring the groups together. So it was not about throwing our comrades away under the bus or any of that. It was not about hatred, but it was about realizing the reality of what racism and segregation and apartheid really had done to black people and had done to white people, because we were saying the origins of the racism is in the white community. We can't organize in the white community at that time. And so you have to go in and face your people, so to speak, and bring them along. And so that's what it really was about. It was not about hating whites and pushing whites out. And fortunately, some of our white colleagues started SOC, which we called it the White Folks Project. And they began doing the very organizing, trying to do, and they were thrown out of those communities when the people in those communities found out that they had a civil rights background or a civil rights mission. They were thrown out and threatened, their lives were threatened. So, in looking back, I think more effort should have been made in that direction. Maybe we wouldn't be in the situation we're in now. But in terms of the nitty-gritty, that was an example. The Atlanta Project started putting out a newspaper, and before putting it out, we had to go to the main office there in Atlanta and, get permission, because they were the ones that were going to print the paper and all of that. And when we said we wanted to call it the nitty-gritty, there were white administrators in SNCC who said, you can't call it that. That's ridiculous. And we said, it's not ridiculous for the black community. Everybody in the black community knows what nitty-gritty means. You got to get right down to the real nitty-gritty, and that's what we were planning to do in that paper. And so we had to fight, to get the name that we knew would resonate. And so that was an example of the sort of distance between us and some of our white colleagues who said, nitty-gritty, that's a ridiculous name. So that's just an example. Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you.
Do you want to try again, Dr. Bird?
Sorry, I'm still thinking of this concept of black power. When I think about Mississippi history, where I'm from, Dr. Simmons is on my dissertation committee and guided much of my study, and of course studied about her, so thank you for all your work. I think about instances of black power in the 1860s and 70s. It was that meant public education. It meant a more inclusive democracy. It meant the due process of law. In my own county, right after the Civil War, a series of 3 or 4 white sheriffs were murdered in a row. Black communities often came to defense of the white sheriffs to try to hold off the claim. I think it's what you said. White communities often feared that if black communities got power, they would do. They had the same evil intentions as the white communities. summarize some of the objectives of Black Power in the 60s, the 1960s.
Well, thank you for putting that contextualization in front of us, because certainly I learned so much from you when you were working on your dissertation, because a lot of that history in Mississippi I did not know, and I'm sure that a lot of us SNCC folk did not know about that, 10, 15-year period that we call Reconstruction, and the time when blacks and whites, some blacks and some whites, were able to unify and really carry out, some of the goals of our Constitution and Declaration of Independence, and how that was wiped out. So I know that a lot of the people in Laurel, Mississippi, where I worked, even though that's Jones County and had been called Free Jones because that county pulled out of the Civil War on the side of the South. So, but nonetheless, I didn't think people knew any of that history. But clearly what we were trying to do, and I think no question, when you start saying Black Power is one thing, but what we were always doing was moving us toward empowerment, because we were risking our lives, as were the local people, to get the right to vote. Well, voting is a power that every American citizen supposedly has. So even though it wasn't called Black Power, the fact that we were organizing freedom schools where we were teaching true American history, which included all the people who had made America be what it is, and that's the good and the bad and the ugly. Well, we were empowering the students by teaching them the truth about the role of Black people in the United States of America. And clearly, we were forming the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and trying to become the party of record in Mississippi. Well, that's power. That was about power. But of course, once we named it that, then, oh my God, it's racist. But in fact, it always was about having the power that every citizen is supposed to have in this country.
And I was just thinking about, when you mentioned the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and when it got to the level that it did when Fannie Lou Hamer was making that speech, and Lyndon Baines Johnson cut her feed and cut right into her, into her making her powerful, testimony, and so, but along those lines, as far as power again, one of the things I'm thinking about right now, because I'm currently writing a manuscript on Black nationalism, and in reading your book, one of the things that came about was culture, and I want to get down to the nitty gritty. If we can do that. I'm very concerned today when I think about Black culture. I'm in the classroom and I ask students, well, what is Black culture? They can't define it. You look at, especially in the media, social media, you see, the top hits, whack, or you look at the young man on the Memphis basketball team, Ja Morant, flashing guns in the strip club, and just foolery. Rich man, why you need to do that? So thinking about power, in a 2023 context, about the state of black culture, whatever that is. I don't know what it is. I think I have an idea, but every time I think I have an idea, something comes along to disrupt. And then, honestly, I'm just exhausted. So, what is your observance today, as far as, in thinking about power and in thinking about our culture today? I guess let's get to the point. What concerns you, but also what gives you some modicum of hope as far as kind of restoring, obviously we can't move backwards, but we still have pertinent issues to fight here, so what are some things the lessons that we can take from yesteryear and apply it to today and the future to get back on the track to freedom?
Wow. I certainly don't know if I can even begin to try and answer that question, Brother Vince. That's a hard one. And I think it's one that all of the scholars and movement activists and political activists need to really focus on, because I think at this point, black culture is very much American culture. I mean, it really always was in some ways. I mean, American culture had always included, often without giving credit, to the black cultural strains within it. I mean, I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and I remember, seeing Elvis Presley before he was big, I mean, down on Beale Street, and, he was learning from all the African Americans hanging out in the juke joints, etc. And clearly he was being groomed. So, so-called rock and roll, comes straight out of black culture. So, we have to be clear that we as a group have probably had more influence than any other on the music particularly, but in other aspects of the culture. But I wish, those parts of the culture that focused on being upright and being good and loving your neighbor and treating others as you want to be treated. I mean, this is what all in my church and in my schools, this is what people were constantly ramming down my throat. You have to be good. You have to be kind. And I just think American culture itself has lost its way in many ways. And that's, Dr. King said once at the, toward the end of his time, that he questioned integrating black people into a burning house. And we rarely talk about him saying that. But that's, I think, on the table.
Well, obviously, we see the effects. Just even if we're just looking at the disintegration, and I say this disintegration because I know it touches some nerves, but of our family unit in 2023 versus, when you first started out, and just like you said, the main thing of respect for one another. You see these, back and forths, online and, different, whether it's male versus female or diaspora blacks versus African Americans, or, it's just so much disintegration talk that and I guess I'm probably one of the youngest people in the room. And just seeing it is just like, man, and so that's why I was saying as far as, with culture, like where we're at today. So it feels good for, and hearing you say that, emphasizing the positive. Obviously, there's always been negative.
Oh, yeah.
In the 60s, there was what? The doogie, right? But there wasn't songs praising being a drug addict, or what I'm saying, versus today is you hear it all up along and down the radio waves. So I think with building power or rebuilding power, or tapping into the power that we currently have now, people always say, oh yeah, building wealth and this and that. Yeah, that's fine, but if we don't have a culture that appreciates one another and love one another for, whether we like-minded or indifferent, then what kind of power can you really build? You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. I know I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but I'm just in conversation with you.
I hear you. I hear you.
Well, I really like sticking with this power issue. And I actually looked up power today because sometimes I try to look to things like physics or whatever and see, and power seemed to be work over time, and I in physics terms, and I took away from that power meaning self-determination. Like there's slavery on one end, and then there's self-determination on the other end, right? And there's this increments away from slavery, like can I do what I want with my body? Can I get credit? Can I live where I want? Do my schools have opportunities? There's these increments away from slavery toward self-determination. And it made me, through reading the book, I saw that identity, needing to figure out what our identity is without it being a reflection of what we're told. In this paper, you talk about we have to listen to people tell us what our music means. We have to listen to people tell us what's good about our music, besides us. So this need to kind of identify ourselves and figure out, dream of the utopia without the constructs, to educate ourselves, to say what we can learn and who we're taught by, to create laws and policies, and then this economic piece, right? And that's kind of what from the book, that's sort of what I walked away from with Black Power is an idea, but it's also a method. It's like knowing what the goal is and working toward self-identity, self-education, self-policy, and economic advantages, right? To get these incrementally so that we can do what we want with our time, right? It's like this bread and roses thing. We want to eat, but we also want to live and love and laugh. And so I wanted to ask you, you were one of the writers of the Freedom School curriculum, and I know that this method was thought about in developing that curriculum. How do we get free, right? And so can you share a little bit about what was maybe in the curriculum or what you were inspired by? And I know that the curriculum wasn't one thing. I know you're still doing Freedom School, but share a little.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I cannot take credit for helping to write the curriculum as much as I was sort of a student. I was not sort of. I was a student to Staunton Lind, who was my professor at Spelman, who was writing the curriculum, and certainly he not alone, but there were other educators that he reached out to, and I was a person doing research for him, and he'd tell me what he needed to find out, and I would go get it. Look it up. Remember, we had no computers. There was no internet. So it meant scrounging around in the library to find these sources and things to bring to him. But the Freedom School idea was that we needed to teach the children And of course, this was created for Mississippi Freedom Summer and then has spread way beyond, and as you note, has continued to this day. And I'm happy that there's a Freedom School here in Gainesville last summer, and it will be again this summer. But the whole idea was to teach the history that had not been taught. And you know, I can't believe I'm in 2023 living in a state that is trying to get rid of the teaching of the history that we fought so hard and really risked our lives to teach in 1964. So the Freedom School curriculum had certainly reading, writing, and arithmetic, because many of our children needed help with that. But it also taught sort of how the country was developed, the political systems, because of course we were pushing the right to vote as a fundamental right. So we had to teach how the vote worked and why it was important and what it was supposed to do for the citizen. So this was a part of the Freedom School. But we also had a lot of culture as a part of the Freedom School curriculum. Music, poetry, plays, you know, and we wanted it to be fun. So the children, you know, did their own plays. There was drawings, and I mean, it was really an all-around curriculum. And it's important to mention that the parents said, well, we want to come to Freedom School too. So you need Freedom School at night. So we set up night classes. And for many of these people, they did not know how to read or write. So we had to have literacy as a part of it. And even though this was not like integrated into the curriculum, but one of the big things is that we brought in Freedom Theater, who put on plays, and this was the first time that many people had ever seen, you know, a theater company. And sometimes we had to do it under the trees because the churches might not let us come in to do the plays there. We had people like Pete Seeger and others coming through constantly, doing concerts, so much singing. Singing was such a big part of it. So it was a really all-around educational experience.
Can I add one little piece? I wanted to tie it back a little bit. So one of the first questions we got was, this is to the curriculum and to the idea of Freedom School. One of the first questions we got was, what are folks so afraid of? And it brings me back to now and what's happening with Black studies, and how they're carving out the parts that teach you how to act and make change and take power, right? And again, I wanted to ask maybe that question about what about the Black studies curriculum are these folks so afraid of? What do you think?
I think it's the same thing, you know. I feel that the thousands, and I've heard some people say that the demonstrations that happened after George Floyd's killing, and you had thousands of people hitting the streets saying Black Lives Matter. And sometimes it was all white demonstrations. I mean, you know, you might find a Black person here or there, but I think this was such a frightening thing to the power structure. And they said, we have to stop this, because if all these white young people are saying Black Lives Matter, taking Black studies, learning the history of this country, we will no longer be able to promote white supremacy and unmitigated white power. So I think that was the fear, and that is the fear about we don't want 1619 Project taught. You know, we don't want critical race theory taught. We don't want white children particularly to know the history of this country.
Get onto something there.
I agree. Don't you feel empowered? I'd like to bring up Desmond Duncan Walker at this time, and then we will leave space for you to integrate your voices in this forum right after her. Let's welcome her. District 1 City Commissioner and friend of Porters Porters. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start this with a hug.
We haven't seen each other since COVID hit. No.
We have not, but I want to start this with that hug and a thank you for the opportunity to come and share in fellowship today. A beautiful Sunday, and I can't think of a better time to have this kind of open and candid dialogue and discussion. As you have just heard from my dear friend, Dr. Palmer, my name is Desmond Duncan Walker. I'm the District 1 Commissioner for the city of Gainesville, and it's a joy and a privilege. I have so much that I could say with regards to the issue of culture. That's one of my backgrounds. As you know, Dr. Zohara, I was birthed in arts and culture right here in the city of Gainesville when I was but a child. But growing up in the household in which I grew up, there was, and I believe much to my benefit, an instilling and pride in who I am as a young black woman. I grew up with two parents who poured that into me every day, and I had the added benefit of grandparents who did the same. Grandmother Gloria Marie Chestnut Duncan, who every single day not only told me that I was the most beautiful girl in the world, but I was the smartest girl in the world, as she sent me off to school and as she put me into cultural arts programs. I will say that culture, from the standpoint of programming and institutions, is something that I believe is critical. When we start to talk about self-determination, when we start to talk about telling our story, when we start to talk about who owns our story, it is critical that we do. And how do you do that? Well, you have to own the institutions. I want to take just a moment to share some of my thoughts when I was the manager of the Aquin Jones Museum and Cultural Center, which is in the heart of one of the oldest neighborhoods dating back to Reconstruction in Gainesville. If you have not had a chance to go to that facility, I invite you to do that. It is a treat. It is a slice of local history that all of us should be apprised of. But I had the chance to manage that facility, and please excuse me because I think that this presents an opportunity for us to go deep, be real, and start correcting some things. So we have the institution, but we also had the opportunity to participate in a project known as the African Heritage Trail through that community. And in that project, we engaged with members of the community to share their stories. Now, we will believe it was sharing their stories, but we were sharing our stories with the University of Florida. And in that exchange, it's not just sharing your story, it is now intellectual property. It is intellectual property. In the sharing of stories with institutions, particularly PWIs, there is an exchange that many don't realize, but we need to. We need to make space for, we need to have an understanding of what is actually happening. It is a transaction. And I have always taken the position that right now, It is an inequitable transaction. So when we start talking about Kujichagulia, we start talking about self-determination, part of righting that wrong is understanding our power in our stories. But how do you do that? When the wonderful University of Florida is coming to you and putting the microphone in your face and saying, you have something amazing to tell us. And you now feel validated because somebody now wants to hear your story. Anybody who has sat through the process of giving an oral history knows that it is lengthy, it is invasive, it is demanding. It demands that you call on emotion as well as memory. And so for me, there is attention that must be paid to the process. There is a level of respect that must be given to the process, but there is also a level of understanding that institutions must have when they go into black communities requesting this of black people, or any community for that matter, but for all intents and purposes, we're talking about the Black Heritage Trail here. There is an economic sense to this as well. When institutions go into black communities asking for their intellectual property, please understand that they are doing that with a handshake. They are doing that sometimes with the promise that your name may be mentioned in the foreword of the book at some point during the play. But the black community is the source so that institutions can become a resource. So my question is always, how do we begin to balance or level that playing field? Because too many of us don't understand, and too many of us are eager, because there is a belief that there is value in us giving to the institution. But then the question remains, what are we getting in return? Books are written, plays are produced, curriculum that continue to make these institutions amazing, well-respected institutions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The commodification of history, our history, with no return. And so I challenge my friends and my colleagues in this space who have a seat at that table, and trust me when I say I know that now it is more challenging than it has been. But my question and my challenge to us all in this space is, how do we overturn that? How can you assist me and us in helping community to realize the power, harness the power of our story and our history, and allow it to be beneficial to us as well? Because it translates into so much more for the institutions that we give to, but unfortunately not nearly as much as it should for us. And so from the standpoint of culture, I understand it to be a commodity. It is beauty, it is music, it is art, it is the spoken word, but it is a commodity, and that's the reality. And it's the one that I want us to focus on, how we begin to level the playing field for African Americans, because there is an economic underpinning to it all. I thank you so much for this opportunity today. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to having that conversation in a much more meaningful way, where we can not only discuss the remedies to this situation, but where we can actually start putting pen to paper, policy and process in place to get it done. Thank you so much.
Ms. Faye? I'm waiting for your next directive. Would you like for me to introduce you? All right.
Facebook.
Just a little bit. Everybody wants a little bit when you've done 1,000,000,000 things. Okay. Okay, well, Faye Williams attended Gainesville High School. And we're going to call way forward. Well, you would want them to know that in 1994 to 2004, you operated a feminist bookstore and meeting space in Washington, D.C., and you serve on so many committees, so many boards, and I will honor you and not list them all, but there are many. But let's just go forward to where we are today. Mama's Club. How about that? Okay. So Mama's Club, the Mama in Mama's Club is an acronym for music, art, movement, and action. So it is a brainchild of Sister Faye Williams. And I can assure you it's amazing. Well, this afternoon, as you can see, we are focused on interviewing Dr. Simmons and her book signing today, so we're going to go forward with that. But Faye just wants to sincerely thank everybody, and I'm sure she's going to do it as well. So I'm going to not say any more about you, except you're amazing and wonderful. And so we're going to open up the forum so that you can have your voice at this time. And I'll bring a mic around. How about that?
I want to say a couple of things. First of all, I want to thank Pastor Ron Walls, and I guess they still call you First Lady Rawls. I'm not sure. But I just want to say thank you so much for opening up the church to us. Gotcha. Yes. I need to say Judge Rawls. That's what we're talking about. Judge Rawls is in the house. But I just want to say thank you for opening up the church, because sometimes churches close down when you're talking about serious stuff like Black Power. So I was, honored when I asked Ron Walls if it would be okay if we came to the church, and he automatically said yes. And I just want to thank this brother. He's my comrade because he was one of those people who were able to relocate the Confederate soldier down in St. Augustine. And I was part of relocating the one in Gainesville. So we bond on that level. And we'll be having another event over here talking about the importance of getting rid of the symbols of a Confederate soldier and the Confederate flag. But today I would just want to thank Zohara Simmons, definitely one of my sheroes, and all the people on this panel. I just want to say thank you. If I had $1 billion, I would give you half of it. But right now I'm still broke, but I'm hoping that at some point I'll get that $1 billion and I'll pay you a few things on the side. And I also want to honor my Auntie Ray, who drove all the way from Palm Coast. She's going to kidnap me and take me back with her, so I'll be out of town for 3-4 days just to be able to relax and sleep. So that's a good thing. Ray is right here. That's my auntie. Thank you so much for coming up, taking care of your niece. The other thing I want to acknowledge is my good friend, Kara Thomas. We call her Black Power, even though she's a white woman, right here. Now, you talk about somebody who was active back in the day. This is Kara Thomas right here. Yeah. White woman, Black Power, nationalist, right here. You need to talk to this brother right here, that sister right there. And Black Power really started, I thought, over in Porter's Quarters. But, of course, I think about everything started over in Porter's Quarters, because we had a group over there. It was called the African People's Socialist Party, and I was part of that back in the day. And we talked about Black Power. That's where I got my learning, my feeling proud, but, feeling proud, feeling active, wanting to do something, came from being part of that People's Socialist Party. Now, I don't want to tell you why I left, but they built me up when I was part of it. The other thing is we are going to have questions, so just give me a minute. I want to ask one question in terms of how does Black Power, this is specific to you, Zohara, in terms of the Black Lives Movement and the Dream Defenders. I'm not sure how it really, I've heard them say Black Power, and I consider them as Black Power people, but I was wondering if you could make a few comments about, how do you see them, and if you know anything more about what's happening with that movement, because it was part of a movement. It wasn't like a group, it was part of the movement. And some people ask a lot, are they still active? I'm sure they're active, but maybe you know a little bit more, you can answer that. And then the other thing was that I'm going to organize a Black Power book club based on your book. And we're going to start in April. So buy the book from Heather. Heather's here. Please buy the book, and hopefully we'll have a Black Power book club over in Porter's Quarters at the center. And one more thing I want to say, that we had a retreat set up for the Democratic Party. And DeSantis and Republicans decided we could not have the retreat over at the Blunt Center, so they canceled that on Friday. Okay? So we're not able to use the libraries anymore. We're not able to use the schools. So this guy is serious. And what I'm telling the Democratic Party, y'all better stand up, stop being scared, and fight back. Stop being scared, fight back, because we're in a serious battle right now. When the Republicans can cancel a retreat, and we were talking about DEI, which is needed, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and he canceled the second part of it. But this is just one example. This is happening nationwide because they really want the school boards and they want our city commissioners. So we have to stand up and we have to fight back. So, and I want to just acknowledge Desmond one more time because she was able to get them to quit using the canine dogs. Did you talk about that? Okay, so we don't have the canine dogs anymore in Gainesville, Florida. It's the front page of the newspaper. So if you got the newspaper, please read about that. But that came through Desmond being on the case. So thank you. Now, am I supposed to let people ask questions? No, Zohara, I want you to answer, and then I'm going to open up for questions. So you just have to flow with me. Just flow with me. So Zohara, can you maybe say a few words about that? Dream Defenders and Black Lives Matter?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to know that the African American freedom struggle, my dearly beloved mentor and friend, Vincent Harding, in his book called There is a River, he says it started on the shores of Africa as people fought off the Europeans who had come to enslave them. And it continued on the ships as they were being brought over. And it continues to Black Lives Matter. So the struggle that African Americans have been waging, and before we were Americans, Africans, have been waging, go back centuries. And so the Black Lives Matter movement basically is a continuation of the struggles that we've been engaged in. When you think about the Black Panther Party, they were very focused on police violence in the African American communities. So this is a continuation, and of course, because we haven't taught as we should the movement history, I'm sure many of the young people in the Black Lives Matter movement may not even understand that they are continuing this long tradition of struggle, and that includes the Dream Defenders, who are our own Florida-based Black Lives Matter movement, which is, by the way, going national. Some of those people are in Tennessee right now at the Highlander Center. The people from Black Lives Matter, from Dream Defenders, and from all the other groups, they are meeting with SNCC elders right now at the Highlander Center. And another organization that I'm a part of, the National Council of Elders, we meet regularly with these young people to share the history with them, but to learn from them. Because of course, how we organized in the 60s and 70s is not the way that you can organize now. Things have changed. So we learn from them, they learn from us. But this is a continuation of the Black struggle for justice and freedom in this country.
Can I also make a comment on that too? I definitely agree with you that Black Lives Matter and Dream Defenders are a continuation of the struggle. But I think for me, as I read them, I don't necessarily read them as a Black power group in the sense of, again, they bring attention to police brutality and the school to prison pipeline, those are. But in talking about power, I'm thinking more about institution building, to the point where you have leverage, to the point where if the people that you're, for lack of a better term, begging to change the system don't do it, then this is what we're going to do. So I don't read those two groups in that same vein because, again, they're more, I read them more as a civil rights group, in the sense of, in human rights, police brutality and, school to prison pipeline, et cetera, et cetera. But as far as power, a lot of them, and I know a lot of these people personally, they're very, very anti-capitalism, and that's fine, you can be that. But at the end of the day, this is the system that we're under. So if we're not talking about ways in having leverage is part of power, then, then it's kind of like at an impasse. And I think that's an overall conversation, and we just don't have enough time to really get to the nitty-gritty of it today. But I think that's just something, and it's something that Malcolm X spoke about a lot, in his conception of power, as far as how you build that leverage, in the institution building, I just think that we're at a point now in 2023 where we still haven't figured out how to navigate, okay, I can be anti-system, but at the same time still understand how to build leverage. Like in final point, for example, I own property here in Gainesville. Some people may critique me and say, oh, you're a Black capitalist. Hold up. For one, a couple of the tenants that I had were former felons. And one of my tenants, yeah, he was a former felon, but guess what? After 5 years from renting from me, he was able to build up enough credit and capital to buy his own house for his family. But that's some of the things that you don't see. You're so busy trying to critique, but not understanding the nuances in this system, And I think that's where we're at a point of confusion, and confusion is the greatest tool of white supremacy.
I do give honor where honor is due, Dr. Sims, and to the staff and everything, and I thank God for being here this afternoon. I am an evangelist, so I might go off. But anyway, I just like to say that I worked in the school for about 40 years, and I'm here to say that if we don't start with the little bitty kids, you can forget it. because, and I think, I work also in my church, and we do a vacation Bible school. I have, I had two of my great grandsons to come down from New York, and I had a child that I used to love so much, and he came down. And he came down for a vacation Bible school. And those kids were so impressed until, I mean, they came down 2 summers, and they all in college now. So we wasn't teaching them nothing about black power or nothing like that, but suppose we had a class in, that set aside for communities, because see, like I heard someone say, you can forget, they don't want to hear what we have to say. They have something to say. And you have to break it down and let them know, because I think that's why we having so much rioting and carrying on the outside, and children doing things they have no business doing. You can't wait until they 11, 12, 13 to try to tell them anything. You have to catch these kids when they're young. And I just think that I just enjoyed everything that has been said. And believe me, I'm like my mother. She was part of the first black people in Gainesville, Florida, to go out to get people to vote. And I've been after it a long time too. I did it in New York. But I'm just saying that I think that we have to think of something a little bit younger. I mean, you can tell me and I can understand, but it's gonna have to be broke down so the young children can feel good about themselves when they're young. And every family is not the same, but you can impress somebody else's child. It doesn't always have to come from the mother or the father. It needs to come from the mother and the father, but if it doesn't, somebody can impress that child, and that child can go on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Question? Anybody? Okay.
Dr. Simmons, if you will answer this question for me. It's my opinion, and then I'm going to ask the question. My opinion is that we as a people, black people, we become too dependent on it being accepted by people who have traditionally oppressed us. I don't care if it's Democrat or Republican. We have become too dependent on trying to please people who traditionally have oppressed us. Even though they don't do it in the most direct ways, because they benefit from it, they do it indirectly. Not all, but many. I think the thing that hurts us the most is that we are tricked, we're bamboozled, we're deceived into being separated from one another. God bless Dr. King and everybody that did the nonviolent movement. But I think that we have to also accept that everybody ain't gonna do it the same. We are not a monolithic type of people. We're different. And those that do it nonviolent, fine. But there are those of us, including myself, who are not concerned with nonviolence, that feel that, I think when you show your hand, people that have ill intentions, they will play to you showing your hand and what your limit would be. When you leave people guessing, they're more apt to respond to your request. But we turn against one another. I was the leader of the Florida Poor People's Campaign. And the reason that I resigned, because we were at a training in Nashville. And the commitment that was asked of us by Dr. Barber is to commit to nonviolence. I respectfully said, because this is your movement and I respect it, I respect the work, I would never be a part and know that I'm not going to commit what you're asking me to do. And so I pray I bless the work that you do, but the work that I do will not be committed to nonviolence, because we can't show people our hand. They'll take advantage of knowing the maximum what we can do. And then what happens is those who are nonviolent don't turn against. What will happen is we can open doors for you. The reason I was able to open so many doors in St. Augustine is because they knew that the crew that was around me, we would take thousands out and disrupt every economic thing that they tried to do, their economic engines, their tourism. They knew that we would bring thousands out and disrupt that, but they also knew that the people that were around me had just as much firepower as the Proud Boys, the Klansmen, and every other white supremacy group that came out against us. And so they had to respond because they enjoy to live a life that's non-threatening. They enjoy living life in a non-threatening way, and they enjoy to be able to have the power to make decisions. They enjoy the power to create economics. When we go and we disrupt that, then they have to listen. But they can't trick our people that don't do it the way that we do it into turning against us in public. We have to learn to support one another and not attempt so hard to even betray one another to receive their acceptance. So and I know SNCC was nonviolent, but I have seen some people in SNCC that I know the statement was nonviolent, but I've read the work. What is your thought on the fact that my statement that we can't show everything, we can't show our hand and show what the max of what we will do? Do you agree or disagree that we have to have everything on the table? And like Malcolm X said, by any means necessary.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. I certainly understand, I think, where you're coming from. When I look at what possibly went wrong, to me, it's not a question of nonviolence versus violence. It's the disunity that has come about because, in my view, we put all of our eggs, if you will, in the basket of electoral politics. And I think that was a grave mistake. Certainly, we had fought for the right to vote, and we had the right to vote, and we certainly had the right to exercise that right. But to think that that was going to solve our problem, electing Black people to office, that alone was not enough. And to give up our organizations, and just as an example, we organized the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. It was a party open to all people of all races. It was a predominantly Black party, and certainly Fannie Lou Hamer made it a nationally known party. And that party basically disbanded itself and went into the regular Democratic Party. And at that point, it no longer had its own ideas and things. It basically became subsumed within the Democratic Party. And it's no longer an oppositional party or a part of the opposition. It has to go along with what the party determines. To me, this was a big mistake. Giving up your own organizations, having economic development parts of that organizations, having freedom schools, I think we fell down on the job. And so in my view, that's a greater problem than the whole problem of violence versus nonviolence. Now, you know, if you read the book, you will find that I went into a lot of different organizations. You know, after SNCC, I became a part of the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad's group. I, you know, left that group for a number of reasons. I won't talk about that now. But I also was a founding member of the Republic of New Africa. And so in my own life, I have seen the importance of nationalistic formations as well as integrated formations. And I think that we basically, you know, we turned our children over to an educational system that hated them. And so while we clearly had the right and should have desegregated the schools, we should have had Saturday schools where we continue to teach our children, love our children, particularly those little ones that you just mentioned, which is where the foundation has to be laid. We could have had programs for parents where we help them learn to be good parents. We needed economic systems to help our people survive. I mean, to me, we have not used our intellects nor our wisdom to keep, I mean, this country, you know, when you look at all the different groupings that have come together and sort of had areas that they controlled, you know, the Irish, was it that they controlled the police and different, you know, we have been, I think, talking about African Americans, you know, we believed in this system, I think, more than the people who created it. And it's time for us to really think about what we need to develop our communities. So in my mind, it's not a question of, you know, violence. It's a question of unity and a question of using our wisdom and intellect to develop institutions that support Black people while we work in an integrated country and world.
It's interesting to hear you say that about the school system because one of the things, and my grandmother, before she passed, she always tells me that she was definitely opposed to school busing and how much that was a controversy. She always said, we didn't need to be bused to, you know, wherever, you know. All we asked for was an equal amount of resources, not to be bused to the other side of town, which effectively destroyed our community. So I just wanted to make it aside, you know, as a young person, you know, remembering that.
I would just like to say I love that conversation right there because you address the culture in that dialogue, and I think that integration, quote, was supposed to be great for the nation, but for the Black man, it was the worst thing that could have ever happened because the culture that we had spent years developing, the communal, almost tribal, where everybody was your mom, everybody, you know, the whole neighborhood walked to school and came, you know, and all that was systemically dismantled. And we are paying the price for that today.
Right.
Question.
I want to introduce one of my friends. Her name is Regina Livingston, and she's representing Unspoken, what's your group's name?
Treasure Society.
What is it?
Unspoken Treasure Society.
Okay, Treasures of Surviving. So after you speak or ask your question, I then want to thank everybody because it's almost 5 o'clock and we have to do the book signing. We have to leave here, but I'll come back. So I'll do that after you ask your questions or make your comment.
Okay, I'm going to be quick. I normally stay quiet at these events because I don't feel empowered to speak. The reason why is because I'm a proud, out loud Black transgender woman. And I have an organization here, and we look out for our community, the most marginalized of us. And so my question to you, Dr. Simmons, is when is the time gonna come for transgender individuals of color? Because when we speak on of color, Black power,
Yes.
we don't feel involved at all. We're being killed by, we're in a pandemic at this moment as far as us being killed and nothing being done about it. The NAACP, the Black Lives Matter. I've talked, I was blue in the face to different members of the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm a part of the NAACP, but I've yet to see any of them rise when one of us are murdered, or when one of us are killed, or one of us are slain in the middle of the street like animals. Nothing said. And we march when our counterparts are murdered, whether they're trans, whether they're binary, whether they're LGBTQ or heterosexual, because that's being Black. Before I was trans, I was Black. And so there is no reason I shouldn't be able to live my life feeling safe, because I know I have my Black counterparts to support and help me outside of my community. So when we say Black power, and when we say all lives matter, can you please enlighten me on how I'm supposed to feel? Because for 50 years of my life, I've never felt like I mattered, and I never felt that I was part of the Black Lives Matter movement. Thank you.
I love you, Regina.
Well, thank you for raising that. I certainly don't have an answer. I think that we have to educate all of our leaders, our members of the various groupings, that if we're saying Black Lives Matter, we mean all Black lives. I think it's a problem of lack of education, and I think it's something those of us who are in the struggles have to constantly address. But I'm not in any way suggesting that I have any answers, but I think it's a terrible issue and that we must address it. And thank you for bringing that to the floor.
Thank you. I just want to say again, the book is called State on Freedom, The Long History of Black Power Through One Family's Journey. And one more question before we close?
Just one more.
Desmond?
More of a comment, if you don't mind, Ms. Faith.
Okay.
Thank you so much. To the issue of institution building, which is something that I'm a huge proponent of, I wanted to hopefully shed a little bit of hope this afternoon to everybody that's in the room and anybody that may be watching. We are facing the very unfortunate reality of many of our youth being slain by gun violence in this city.
Yes.
And in recognition of that, I traveled back in my heart and my mind to a time when I worked in the heart of Liberty City at a place called the African Heritage Cultural Arts Center. And to kind of make this quick, what I saw there in the heart of one of the most embattled communities in this country was a place that was, I call it, an oasis in a desert. It was a place that families and youth sought refuge in. Now understand that on the corner of 62nd and 22nd, you can do any manner of ill that you want to do. But I stood on the back of that facility one day with my then manager, Mr. Marshall Davis, God bless his soul. I am, Miss Faye, I see you. Who watched as 5 young African-American men who did not belong to the center walk towards it. We knew they didn't belong to us, but they were walking towards us. And so instead of being alarmed, we welcomed them. And as they got to us, the leader of that group said, "Yo, what this is?" And I said, "I'm glad you asked." Took them all on a tour of the facility. Long story short, by the time they were done touring the theater, the art gallery, the shop that built all the set pieces to the theater experiences, the museum, etc., everyone wanted to attend. I say that to say, when our youth are given the option, when they are given the alternative, many of them will choose the right thing. They had but go 20 steps further to that street where they could have sold drugs, pimped, prostituted, and anything else, but they chose the alternative. And so building those institutions now is more critical than it ever has been. I'll say that piece of hope is that in last, I believe it was November, I put forward a proposal for a cultural arts center here in Gainesville because we do not have that. We don't have that. It was supported unanimously by my colleagues. We are now in the phase of consultants taking it up, doing a feasibility study, et cetera, et cetera. And the goal is a lot bigger than what I think many would believe it to be. Let me just say it like that. The opportunities to do a lot of the work and the building that we've talked about in here today exist in that space. And so I'm hoping that we can continue conversations like this, but also building movements out of that space to continue to push forward, because we know that we can get the job done if we have a place to do it. Thank you.
All right. And I just want to follow through by saying thank you again, and plug in, it's Mama's Club Gainesville. We forgot the Gainesville part because there are a lot of Mama's Clubs, but Mama's Club Gainesville. And we are about music, art, movement, action. Repeat after me. Music, art, movement, action. One more time. Mama's Club is about music, art, movement, action. That's our culture right there in one word, Mama's Club. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Zohara. And we know that Heather has the books out in the lobby. So if you haven't gotten your book, if you can have the money to buy a book for a friend or your neighbor or your family member, please do. We need to sell some more books. Thank you so much.